What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're jumping in with Destiny 2 news and some updates from Bungie. And so alongside the dungeon launch this weekend, there are plenty of updates regarding bugs in the game at the moment, some of them kind of significant, missing pinnacle drops, missing narrative for the episode, as well as some issues associated with weapons, so we'll talk about those. There are some other more amusing bugs as well, and we'll touch briefly on a couple of things associated with the dungeon, as well as previews for some upcoming rewards this season, some interesting armor ornaments that we'll be able to get access to, exotics, and Bungie getting ready for Marathon, and it potentially looks like pre-orders for that could actually go live early in 2025, potentially even with a link to Destiny 2. So a few things to talk about in the video as always. If you enjoy this one, get subscribed and I'll keep you up to date, but otherwise, let's get into it. And so first and foremost for the moment, Bungie Help have posted a bunch of updates regarding the game. And the first says we've identified an issue where some episode revenant dialogue and narrative does not play when completing minor and major field work. Additionally, we're looking into discoverability of potion recipes as players enter post-narrative Act 1 gameplay. And that second part is maybe referencing the lack of obviousness around getting various potions and things like that. So share your thoughts. Otherwise, DMG said we're currently digging into some reports of missing pinnacle drops. Warlord's Ruin mistakenly advertises a pinnacle drop, but that's been replaced by the new dungeon. Otherwise, currently they're aware of the third reset on Pathfinder not granting a drop, and the featured exotic mission not granting drops. So there are those and potentially others that they're currently looking into. Separately, Bungie have recognised the fact that Revision 0 isn't working correctly at the moment, and once you activate the sniper mode, the gun totally locks up and won't fire, so that's somewhat inconvenient. They're also looking to get a fix for that very soon. And otherwise, players are still talking about Wicked Implement. Bungie had said they'd seen reports that both Wicked Implement and Conditional Finality aren't receiving the anti-barrier perk from the artifact, and they say this is by design due to the exotics being status and having the intrinsic slow perk already. But players have pointed out Wicked Implement's slow effect requires build-up through repeated precision hits. And players also have pointed out on Reddit that Conditional Finality doesn't slow at all. Instead, it freezes, and Shattering Frozen Targets also doesn't stun overloads, but does stun Unstoppables. So, funnily enough, the community are essentially correcting Bungie there about their own weapons, and what appears to be some confusion around champion capability on those weapons, so potentially we'll get further updates on them. Otherwise, a quick thing to keep in mind, Ryan on Reddit pointed out that with the launch of the final shape, the Wave 50 bonus chest in Onslaught is bugged, and only the first person that opens it will actually get loot, and it would appear that that is applying to Onslaught Salvation as well. Lastly though, a slightly more amusing bug at the very least, but given that the helm has now been moved to the last city, the same instance of the helm is actually used for the ending cutscene for the final shape, the one where we're sitting aboard, looking out at the Traveller. But now that the helm is moved, if you actually see that cutscene, all you get to see is a load of last city buildings underground, as opposed to the actual Pale Heart. So that's a pretty weird one. I'm sure Bungie will fix it soon, but kind of amusing nonetheless. Up next though, Vesper's Host, the new dungeon, launched this weekend. We're still on contest mode at this precise moment, and safe to say contest for this dungeon is pretty difficult, with a relatively small number of teams so far being able to complete it. Our team went in for a fairly casual run. We haven't cleared the final boss yet, but encounters and mechanics wise, actually I think it's a pretty fun dungeon. Haven't picked up any weapons yet or really had chance to look into them, but I quite like the look of the armor set, as we can see in the press release right here. A couple of updates regarding the dungeon though, and firstly Bungie said they're aware and investigating reports from players crashing in Vesper's Host. On top of that though, due to an issue, some of the weapons weren't properly disabled in Vesper's Host contest mode, and that's based on the list that Bungie published yesterday. So they say while players are able to use them, there is a risk of triggering guitar errors. So I'm not sure if these weapons, armor pieces, and abilities are affecting the contest mode only, or whether this is a general bug with Vesper's Host and Bungie are going to have to do a bunch of bug fixing after contest mode. But nonetheless, anything from that disabled list, you can use it if it's available, but just keep in mind some of those things, some of the supers like Tether, are reasonably consistently causing issues for some players. So keep those things in mind and give us any thoughts on the new dungeon if you've had a chance to jump in. Next up though, a quick update on the Salvation's Grip catalyst. This is a new one added this season with the perk Rhyme Stealer, where destroying a stasis crystal or defeating a frozen target with the weapon will grant frost armor. I haven't picked it up yet, but we now have confirmation that this is a playlist drop, which is what we typically see with catalysts like this in seasons. But if you want to pick it up, Vanguard Strikes, Gambit, or Crucible have the chance to drop it. So there's that. And otherwise, it looks like Bungie have introduced a handful of universal ornaments that interact with exotics. We've seen seen these in the past, where legendary pieces will pair with unique visual effects on certain exotics, so these will be sold via Eververse. But firstly, there's the Grippies, a gauntlet ornament that interacts with the Stompies. Another one for hunters is the Sacred Strategy, and that interacts with the Gaia Falcon's Hauberk. And then there's War Rigger, moving over to the Titan, and these gauntlets interact with Actium Warrig, of course. There's also for Pride, which is a class item that interacts with Second Chance. For the Warlocks though, pretty cool looking chest piece right here, the Hermetic Robes, which have an interesting interaction with Cenotaph Mask, but there's also the Tempest Caller Robes, which interact with Getaway Artist. So if you like the look of those, keep an eye out in the Eververse store, although I think largely these are likely to sell for silver. Last brief thing, but of course outside of Icebreaker and the Season Pass exotic, there is another exotic that we'll be getting this season. The assumption is that the exotic mission will drop in Act 3, and that's on the basis of the fact that we have an Act 1 activity with Onslaught. Bungie confirmed that Prison of Elders is reprised for Act 2, and the only other activity we know of is the exotic mission for the episode, so presumably, like in Echoes, that will drop in Act 3. But Bungie did share an image in the press kit for Act 1 that shows this weapon, which certainly appears to be an exotic. Some folks have said, could it be linked to Festival of the Lost? That would be really cool if it were the case, but I don't necessarily think that is true because the concept art for this weapon was actually shown off in the reveal for episodes for the year when Bungie were talking about Revenant specific content, so I would assume that this is a Revenant exotic weapon, and perhaps it's a mistake that Bungie actually put this in the press kit, as normally they wouldn't do that with unrevealed exotics. But there's also a hidden exotic intrinsic in the database called Nightsworn Sight, where dealing final blows to targets grants Nightsworn Sight, and during that time, final blows grant True Sight, and ammo slowly reloads from reserves, and sub-munitions will weaken targets. And thematically, it looks like that bonus could indeed apply to the weapon that we see in the image, so just thought that was worth another brief mention for any folks who haven't seen it yet and perhaps are curious. But the last thing to touch on, and there's an indication that Bungie are revving up for a potential release of Marathon in the next year or so, and we know that 2025 was a sort of updated target date for Bungie and Marathon. But Destiny Bulletin and the game post shared that a data mine suggests Marathon pre-orders could be coming soon, and in the game files that have been updated for episode Revenant, there's a text string that says offers entitlements Marathon pre-order, and of course that's triggering speculation that Marathon pre-orders could open as early as Q1 of 2025. Although some of the strings also indicate that that could be linked to episode Heresy, which might mean we'll be looking at February or beyond before a pre-order for Marathon starts. But there could indeed be a link to Destiny 2, and perhaps a bonus that could be unlocked in Destiny 2 if players do pre-order Marathon. Another interesting element though linked to this, and a bunch of folks have actually been at Bungie playtesting and giving feedback about Marathon. And interestingly, that includes a lot of folks in the Halo community currently, but also a more familiar face for a lot of us. Karu shared on Twitter that he's been at Bungie checking it out. And so either way, it indicates again that Bungie are getting closer to a point where they'll likely show off more stuff related to the game, and potentially even announcements around a release date, pre-orders, and of course that would include more gameplay and information about what Marathon will actually be, because reportedly it has changed direction a couple of times behind the scenes in the last year or so. So it's going to be interesting to find out, but we'll have to simply wait and see. For today, guys, that is what we have to round up in this news video though, so I hope as always that you've enjoyed it, and if you have, a rating helps us out, plus give us your thoughts on any of the things we've discussed in this one. Otherwise though, cheers for tuning in, and I hope you guys have an awesome day.